Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Show. I really wanted to set the scene for this week with a couple of words to start off with, if I could. I've got a really interesting conversation, I think, with Mustafa Askari tonight. He is a chief economist with an organization in Ottawa that reviews parliamentary budgets. He spent over 30 years with the federal government, ending up with a role with the Parliamentary Budget Office. And he really is brilliant in regards to budgets and fiscal spending and what we need to do in Canada to be successful. And then tomorrow, I've got Charles Saint-Anand, who is a chief economist with a credit union in Alberta, also talking about the federal budget, also someone who spent some time with the federal government in the Department of Finance, as well as investment banking. We talk with both of them a fair amount about the current budget, this massive increase in industrial strategy, in green tech, climate change, et cetera. Is it going to be successful? Is it made in Canada, or is it just a copy of the United States? Have we been successful in the past with industrial strategies, et cetera? And we also talk a fair amount about why in this era of inflation, when the Bank of Canada and central banks around the world are increasing interest rates to try to slay inflation, are we having a budget that is more inflationary, creating even more deficits going on into the future? And I guess where I come out from this conversation is that the federal government doesn't have a revenue problem. We're getting lots of revenue, and we're financing via deficits a lot of the expenditures that they want to spend. We have two incredible issues in the federal government. Number one is we have a spending problem that we've got to get under control. And both the gentlemen that I just mentioned, both chief economists, talked about it being something that could be a slippery slope, could be more problematic if we enter into a recession and the government needs to come up with more money. We're just following the wrong strategy. And then number two, we have an incredible productivity challenge, and that doesn't seem to be thought about or addressed at all. Real median incomes haven't grown in like a couple decades, and productivity hasn't grown in a long period of time. We don't have an industrial strategy. We don't have a prosperity strategy. We don't have a growth strategy other than this copycat of the American climate change green tech strategy. What's going on? Doesn't the federal government see the challenge? Their revenues would go up if our real incomes went up. That's the best way to finance things that they want to finance. And we've got this coming tsunami with old age pensions and healthcare as people age, as the baby boom ages, and we don't appear to be doing much, if anything, to solve that problem. So, the grade that most of the people gave the federal budget was I think a B- or a C. That's not where we should be. And then on Wednesday, I've got a really fascinating interview with a member of provincial parliament. His name is Ted Hsu. And last week, I had a really interesting conversation with Andrew Perez, who's also an Ontario Liberal, talking about the provincial situation. And, I commented to a couple of people over the course of the last couple of days how impressed I was with Ted Hsu. This guy's got a PhD in physics. He's got an incredible career in academia, as well as in politics, as well as in non-for-profits. And people came back and said he's too smart. He's too smart to become leader of the Liberal Party and too smart to become premier. The policy discussion, listen to it on Wednesday, I thought was excellent. The man answered every single one of my questions incredibly thoroughly and detailed and well thought out. Isn't that terrible? If we would rather have a guy that can describe how good his haircut was rather than someone that's really smart and brilliant and brings some good solutions to the table. And then I had this April Fool's joke that I did about running for Toronto mayor, and I got a bunch of responses over the course of the weekend, a ton of interesting responses. I talked about 6 crises that we had in Toronto: the housing crisis, the fiscal crisis, the crime crisis, the transit crisis, the green crisis, et cetera. And people said that no one that they thought that was going to be running was going to be attacking and addressing these crises, that this was going to be a popularity contest. And worse, because there are going to be so many different people running in an regular election year, that really we wouldn't be enjoying much of a turnout. And that's a shame. And interesting, I think that the opposite is true in Toronto than the federal situation. The Toronto situation, and there were a couple of comments that I got in letters to the editor and articles in the last little while, that Toronto really does have a revenue issue. It's not a spending issue, but yet a lot of the attention is on spending. And the revenue issue is because successive mayors and councils in Toronto have kept property taxes in Toronto, even though it's got the highest housing prices on average, the lowest property taxes per market value of any city in all of Ontario. And that's because we've catered to this no tax, low tax populace that go out and vote. And we've got a revenue crisis. So we've got a spending crisis in Ottawa. We've got a revenue crisis in Toronto, and in Ontario, I think we've got we've got a democracy crisis where turnout was the lowest it's ever been. The first past the post system resulted in screwy situation where it took far fewer people to vote a Conservative MPP than a NDP, and far fewer people to elect an NDP or than a Liberal, something like a factor of 6 to 1. Such that the Liberals actually got almost the same public opinion poll that the NDP did, and got 1/6 the number of seats. So we got a democracy deficit, and maybe an idea deficit. And then on Thursday, I've got a really interesting situation. I've got a interview with a CEO of a company by the name of PredictMedix. That's the potential solution. A really exciting technology company, grown, thought of in Toronto, raising money across North America to revolutionize and change what's being thought of in regards to health tech in one area. And then I've got 3 females on Thursday and Friday that I'm going to be chatting about. Hanya Kisimachuk, who is 66 years old and is still modeling and proud of her gray hair. Anastasia Tidizanis, who is a young product designer, marketer, who talks about how women in charge can end up being very successful. And then Kim Tama, who talks about fitness as therapy. All of them sort of coming out of International Women's Day and International Women's Month. And I wonder, maybe part of the problem is we're not being inclusive enough, and that's what Indira Naidu Harris, who I spoke with on Friday, talked about how the lack of diversity and inclusion in our government system, in our politics, in our business, in our academia, etc., was robbing us of the voices that we need. So, what am I coming out of all this? I think we got some issues. And I enjoy immensely the opportunity to chat with people every day and come to you every night at 6 o'clock. And I get supposedly something like 5,000 people listening to my podcasts and 20,000 people listening to my radio shows. I love interviewing these people and trying to figure out what the answers are. And I hope that you join me on this journey sometime, trying to figure out what some of these answers are, because I do think that we've got, as I said, a spending problem in Ottawa, a revenue problem in Toronto, and an idea problem in Ontario. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. Here's on to the rest of the show in just 2 minutes.